Welcome to this session. First, I would like briefly to introduce the panelists, and so they do not introduce themselves for time reasons, and later they will introduce their research questions. And so here on the panel, myself, I'm from Germany, also affiliated with Southampton University. Michel is from the Research Software Alliance Australia based. Neil is from Edinburgh. He's director of the Software Sustainability Institute, and Simon is the director of strategy of the Sustainability Institute, and Inga is from the University of Heidelberg, from the RSE group there. So this is the panel. And what's about? What's RSE research? So research software engineering, research. Maybe a bit confusing. We have twice research here, so it's research on research software engineering. My background is software engineering research. I'm a professor for software engineering, and it's just a permutation of the words, and we could combine it, and then we have research software engineering research. It's a bit difficult to pronounce, so I suggest to call it RSE research. So to use the acronym for RSE. And what's the goal? The goal is to understand research software engineering and to improve it. It's like general research, software engineering research where we intend to improve software engineering. And with this combination of software engineering research, we have a discipline software engineering. But for research on RSE, I would expect that we also need other disciplines, not only software engineering, but also economics, psychology, sociology, etc., many others. And I'm a software engineering researcher, so I do not know much about the other disciplines, but others know. So that's the topic we are talking about. The question is whether that's relevant. It's often a question for research. Is it relevant what we are doing to the real world? And that's also a goal of this panel, to somehow investigate this. As a follow-up of this session today, I plan to provide a questionnaire on these research questions, and I will post it at the Slack for this conference. And my idea is that you, or not only those here in the room now, but also others who are online and at the other rooms, can rank or vote for these questions whether they are relevant for RSE practice. I will use Google Forms for this. You may complain about it, but you don't need to log in. I don't know your identity. I don't collect demographics. Google will know, but I don't know. But it's convenient for me, and it works very well. And you find the link to it at this web page, which you find there. And this page is linked from the abstract in the program, so you don't need to note it, but I will also post it later. The slides were also presented there, and Michel suggested that maybe as a follow-up, we could form a task force in the context of the Research Software Alliance on this topic, if there's enough interest. Just to mention this, we can also discuss about that, if there are enough people interested in the topic of RSE research. So, now for the questions. I had to change the panelists a bit, and initially I planned to have Jeff Carver on the panel. I discussed with him about it. He cannot be here because it's now in the middle of the night in Alabama. We discussed about it, but we didn't plan to have this. And I just briefly introduce his question that he suggested, and later we will have questions from the rest of the panel. So Jeff is also a software engineering researcher in Alabama, at Alabama University, and he suggests as a question, so to study in which context, in which characteristics for research software engineers, so for the people who do research software engineering, that they use traditional software engineering methods. Let's take an example, requirements engineering. In software engineering and the industry, this is a big topic. In research software engineering, at least my observation is, it's not often used or done, as an example. So traditional research software engineering practices, are you interested in this as a RSE community? So far for this question. I also had the idea, plan to have Caroline J. from Manchester here, but she cannot be here, so I visited her a few weeks ago, and we discussed about a question she would propose for RSE research, and what she suggests is to study what are the essential skills that RSEs need. For instance, there are initiatives to define foundational skills for RSEs, etc. And one could also do some research on this, which are the required skills. I hope I did not confuse you too much with these questions, and it's clear so far what it is. So far, these initial questions. So we go to the panel. I think everybody has a microphone, or not, but we can share. You can share it. And I asked the panelists ahead of the meeting here, of the session, to send me some research questions and to introduce them. And this way, also introduce yourself briefly. Michelle is first.
Thanks, Willie, and great to have everyone here joining us today, both in the room and online. I chose 3 questions. The first one is, how do we enable recognition of RSE? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to read off the screen there to remember what my question is, in recruitment and promotion. So obviously a critical concern to many people at this conference, as to how these career paths can really be made much more sustainable. But part of my particular interest, while there's many factors in how we enable recognition and promotion and tenure, and there's underlying issues such as how do we even measure success in research software engineering. Part of my particular concern is, what are the policies that can enable that? So after this, I will put in the Slack for this session some of the policies that we've come across in a RESA working group co-led with Research Data Alliance, where we've been trying to get lists of policies that support research software in research performing organisations. And tenure and promotion is the set of policies that it's hardest to find examples from. We can find a lot for research software licensing, for example, but I think it's very useful to have some solid examples. So I want to share what we do have, and if you've got others, please share back in the Slack, because it's something then that you can use in your local environment. Take to your team or faculty or manager and say, other institutions have done this, and this is the kind of wording they used. Maybe it could be integrated into some of what we do. So that was my first question. The second one was, how are RSE groups funded? Another interesting question of interest here. And by RSE groups there, I mean groups in organisations rather than national RSE associations. And my interest there is because it shows who values the RSEs, whether they're funded by their faculty or centrally by the Open Science Office or by an IT or part of the organisation, and centrally located or embedded in different disciplines. And there's been some different work already done showing some of these models, looking at case studies in different organisations. You've probably all got your own case studies where you've seen it in institutions around you, if not your own. And some of this will be discussed a little bit more on the RSE Worldwide sessions that are happening Wednesday and then repeated on Thursday. And we've got a list of resources we've been putting together about how you set up an RSE organisation, both nationally or regionally, or in your organisation. So I'll share that in the links as well. So yeah, interested to see which models are winning, how many RSE groups are still centrally run versus embedded in disciplines. And my last question, quite deliberately provocative, what proportion of funding should be dedicated to supporting research software? And I came up with this question because in 2020, one of the leads of the research data movement, Baron Mons, who is something like the CEO of CoData, that mightn't be the right job title, maybe he's the chair of the board or something. But he wrote a commentary in Nature saying that 5% of all research funding should be spent on research data management. And yeah, some people kind of went, that'll never happen. That was 2020. And when I now think about it, I think support for research data management is well on the road to that. Maybe it's not 5% yet, but you know, certainly in the last decade and more recently, there's been a lot more support for research data management and those personnel. So I'd like to make an equivalent statement about research software and put it out there. What should that percentage be? Should it be more than research data management? Less? We've got some nods for more, but yeah, I think it would be nice to paint that vision, and if so, I wonder what that number would be.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. Next is Neil. Another question that could be related, or follow-up question to all these research questions is which research methods to use to address these specific research questions. It's not for now, but maybe for later, first to identify or to assess the relevance of these questions. Yeah. And Neil has also some questions, if you remind them. Yeah.
Yeah. It's great to be here and to see all of these people who are so interested in research in this area. I come from this from a slightly different background from Willie. I come as a user of research software, so most of the things that I'm interested in are around whether we can use other methodologies, other techniques that have come from areas, software engineering, sociology, and so on, to understand research software itself. So my three questions are all around whether we can see what the differences are between research software and other types of software, and then how we can use that to benefit the community. So my first one is around categorizing research software and understanding whether or not if we use the kind of standard techniques of mining software repositories and so on, if we can understand the way that research software is built and whether there are any differences from doing that in a research software engineering community versus open source versus commercial closed source. If you're interested in that, Cara Mora and myself have a poster that looks at some of this that you can have a look at, and my PhD student, Flick Anderson, is also at the conference. So feel free to kind of talk to them about some of the questions related to that. The second one, which I've stolen from Simon, is around the economic impact of research software. So how do we understand how to show what the benefit is of research software to a world which is driven by value, return on investment, or more kind of like, as we go forward, things like societal impact? So can we reframe what we're doing and understand how software plays a part in this world that is driven by economic, political, social, different frameworks? And then the third one is to try and understand what's the critical software that we need to invest in. So kind of moving to the next stage, if we are going to say we're going to put in 5% or 10% of investment from all of research funding into research software, how do we know, how can we give some evidence for what we should be putting that investment into? Is it the stuff that everyone uses? Is it the thing that isn't getting the investment but is important? And so can we use any of these techniques that are in existing different frameworks for understanding criticality of software and apply them to research software?
Yeah, thanks, Neil, for these questions. And we go further with Simon.
I don't know whether this microphone is working. Is it?
It's working.
It is.
Very good.
So yes, thank you. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. So I usually come at these questions from a sort of campaigning background. So usually I'm looking at, what evidence do I need to try and push the community in the right direction, get policymakers to make changes that benefit the research software engineering community. But today, I've actually taken it from leading an RSE group, and I'm interested in some of the research we could do around that. So specifically, I'm interested in looking at what are the key points during a research project at which an RSE should be involved to maximize the impact of their involvement. So basically, we should have an RSE involved throughout a research project, but resources are often limited and we don't have that sort of luxury. So when is it best to focus those times of involvement so that we push the research project on and get the outcomes that we want? The second question I'm interested in is what are the most effective methods for sharing knowledge about different software projects across a group of RSEs? So everybody who runs an RSE group has this problem, and that you often are working with a very small number, frequently one RSE on a project, and you want to make sure that their knowledge and expertise on any particular project is passed on to others in the group. They might leave, they might move on to a different job path or anything so you need to get that expertise out and try and share it as effectively as possible, but at the same time you have limited resources, so you can't just give other people time on that project where it's not cost recovered. And then my final question is looking at the practical methods that RSEs use to determine the cost of requirements gathering. Now this sounds like a really sort of small question. It's a sort of the thing that everybody needs to do, but it's often a part of a research software project that isn't cost recoverable easily. So you can't charge a client researcher that you're working with for the cost of requirements gathering, or maybe you can, before they've got their funding in place, that they need to know how much time they need from you. And we end up in this sort of circular problem of they need data before you can be paid to collect that data for them. Yeah. So yes, I'm interested in those three questions. And I'm really interested in this idea of research on RSEs, and we've kept it really broad. So we've got big questions about how the community comes together, really specific questions about groups. I'm really interested in where this goes.
Yeah, just to start here, no? Yeah. So thanks, Simon. Finally, Inga. I have to switch. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. So thank you very much. I very much enjoy being here. And I'm from one of the first RSE departments in Germany. We just recently started taking this up. And so I'm from the Scientific Software Center, and I put on my hat of Scientific Software RSE. My questions are, what are the stages in the life cycle of a research software? So can we, for example, identify prototype, some lab software, and something that's more generally used as the 3 stages? Is that possible? And then what enables or hinders a transition from one stage to the other? So maybe we don't need to every software to transition from a prototype into something that's generally used, but how can we identify the ones that should transition, and what factors help such a transition? And then what are the technical aspects so that we as RSEs can contribute to this type of problem? So where can we step in and help research software grow and become more broadly used?
Yeah, thanks, Inga. These are also very interesting questions from a software engineering point of view. I mentioned I'm a software engineering researcher. I only have one question that I added here. I have many more in mind, but for this session, I only have one here. It's concerned with the architecture of software. In industrial software engineering, this is a big topic since many years, and my observation is that in research software, this is often not even considered that there is an architecture of the software itself, how it's structured, at least not at the start of the software development. Later, when it grows and it becomes infrastructure research software, this changes a lot because the architecture is very important for maintainability and the long life of software, etc. And in other areas of software engineering, we observed, defined, and so on, architectural styles, design patterns, etc. for research software structures. And the question is whether different categories, different types of research software require or should have different styles of architecture. That's the question I'm posing here. And So far for the, we can switch to the canopy questions now. Let's see, I'm starting from the first, no likes so far, okay. An idea, instead of RSE research, what about RSE meta-research, okay, to signify that this is research on the researchers. I had assumed that RSE research was to do with the practice of developing new technologies as an RSE. Okay, so the term, it's your question, thanks. I fully understand this question, and we struggled with the name. There was also a suggestion of research software science by a colleague from the US, Hiru, I think is the name. Simon, did you want to mention something? Or somebody raised his hand? No? Okay. Does somebody from the panel would like to comment on this? Otherwise, I will comment.
I mean, I guess my main comment, I've been involved in a number of these emerging fields before, and it's always hard to come up with a name that is distinct and clear to everyone. So I think my kind of thing would be, can we have a nice kind of scope definition? This is going to the not enough time for requirements engineering, and eventually the name will come through. But I think what you mentioned in the question is really interesting around is this meta research? Is this really research on research? And there've been some interesting things going on in the UK around research on research from both the Research on Research Institute, but also some of the funders really interested to understand this. And it would be really, really interesting to hear your ideas for what are the topics that this should fund in this research on research, meta research strand.
Yeah. Can I just say on that front? I think that is the really interesting bit here. It's what of these very wide and disparate areas are going to be the ones that are most useful and important to the RSE community. Having an understanding of that, I think, would be fantastic.
Yeah, so indeed, I think it's a good suggestion, and we should think about this. There was recently the call from the UKI on meta science proposals. Simon and myself, we are involved in one of those. I don't know whether it's confidential, but I don't think so. And good point. I have no answer yet, so I will think about that, and maybe others also, to call it meta science. It's research on. But meta science could be science on doing research on research on. Okay, next question. Maybe I missed some, sorry for that. Are there differences between research software developed in a lab and by professional teams? Let's
clarify that some of what your questions were, given that I work with a very mature team, don't ring true in that we do a lot of what you consider professional SE practice, but I think that is the nature of a mature professional team.
Yeah.
So do we really need to make that there are distinctions in that between the hobbyists in the lab and very mature teams?
I hope that you could understand this.
I was just trying to explain the question. People online. Yeah,
for online. Maybe I try to repeat your question. So I have one, but this one here, and just try to revert it. So if you have, you call it major RSE team or something like that, so a team that is already developing a software since a long time, maybe, if I understood it correctly, the context, and whether in this context the software development is really different to industry or professional software development. Is this correct?
Neil knows what I mean.
If I can kind of like respond back, it's something that I have been trying to push back against quite a lot in the software engineering research community, this idea that somehow you can consider the whole of the research software engineering community to be doing things at the same level of maturity, or indeed that there's not the similar spread of different software engineering practices within the research software engineering community as there is in industry, and particularly when you look at software development outside of the major tech industry. So for a long time I worked in technology transfer, helping industry develop different pieces of software for things like finance or for production manufacturing and so on. And you saw a huge spread of different usage of things like architecture and so on. So I think one of the things that's really interesting here in terms of the research is how can you identify what are the characteristics of the maturity of the team? Is it about the time they've spent together? Is it about the types of people that they have in the team that makes them more likely to apply different types of engineering practices more effectively, or is there something else? And I don't think you can say it's simply that industry always uses architecture from the start, and basically research software engineering never uses engineering. I think it's much more about the type of software that's being developed, the stage in its life cycle, and the type of team that's developing it, as you said. And I'm really keen to understand, can we understand what makes this better through doing research?
Yeah, maybe I can also add in a minute, Simon. So I think that there's not one type of research software. We have many categories and types of research software, and some are developed like a professional software in industry, but many is not developed like professional software in industry, and it also doesn't make sense to try to do it on a readiness level 7 or whatever, technology readiness level 7 or something like that. And to better understand it, some work that I'm doing at the moment is to define or to identify categories for research software, and we will need different methods for the different categories, for instance. Just as comment. Simon, you wanted to?
So I certainly do have something to say. I don't want to talk if the other panelists want to say. Do you? No, okay. So this question about the difference between software developed within academia and software developed in industry has been troubling me for a while. And funnily enough, it's the RSE conference that kind of caused this trouble for me, because I'd often go and talk to our sponsors and they'd say, oh, well, we do things differently in industry. And I always wanted to get to the bottom of that. So in SSI4, we've fortunately had some money together to go off and start interviewing a large number of different organizations, and I can't name them yet because we're not at that stage, but some very big organizations, multinationals, and down to SMEs. And what we're doing is we're trying to find out how their how their software is put together and how their software teams work. If you want to know more about that, I'll just ask Ben to put his hand up, and you can go and talk to him, because he's the person doing all the interviewing. So what we're finding as well is it's a lot of this team-based construction of software development is something that we don't really get a huge amount of in research. We definitely get it, but there's a lot of software being developed by very small teams or individuals largely. And we're looking at the difference in the way that those people work. And one of the interesting things we've found is that on these sort of multinational, huge software companies, they can afford to bring in people with the whole suite of software engineering expertise. And they're generally largely very happy with the people that are coming from research and working for them. And the ones working at the SME side, because they're not paying the sort of super salaries, they're having to do a lot more training in engineering concepts to the new staff who are joining them. So I'm really interested in where this is going to go, but I'll give one spoiler, and that is that we see one of the big differences is the understanding how to work in a team, and it's not just the using GitHub amongst a group of people, right? It's much, much more than that. It's the actual dynamics, the communication, and just how that team works together that seems to be the defining difference.
Inga, you had one.
So I think it's also a question of how broadly available the software then becomes. So I think if we see software that has been developed by very few people, that has become broadly available and used in the community, but most often the software that is very well known and used has a larger team behind that also handles maintenance and so on. So I think that's also somewhat connected to this question.
Yeah, thanks. I think we go to the next question. Stefan raised the question whether RSE is on the ground. So those who are doing RSE work, that's benefit from being researched. That's also a question in general for software engineering research, whether the results of research have an impact on the practice of software development. I think this is what you are asking. We don't know. But it could be that if we better understand the specific requirements on research software engineering, that we may invent, propose, or whatever, introduce new methods, new tools that are specifically designed for research software engineering and to address the problems or observations. Maybe. That's my question, my answer for this. Maybe there are more on that. Yeah, Inga?
Maybe better career paths.
Better career paths, yeah.
Maybe they would be valued more if they could be shown to be just as valuable as other roles.
Okay. Yeah, you have a comment?
Just on that, I really wanted to make sure always,
Michael?
I really want us to make sure always to focus on how doing RSE better improves science and scholarship. It worries me too much when we focus on what helps us as individuals or community, because that argument will work less well for the world than if we explain that it's trustworthy and reliable software is essential for trustworthy and reliable research, which is essential for a productive, healthy, and fair society. That's how the line of argument goes.
Very good comment. My comment on this comment would be that in software engineering education also we have kind of assumption that if we give a better education of the software engineers, then via better processes and so on, better quality of the software, then the impact of the software is better and higher and so on. I think it's very similar. So improving the work of RSEs has a kind of indirect impact on the improving the science. Yeah, Simon.
Can I say, I think those two things can be very closely tied together. You know, so we need to show RSEs on the ground how this research is going to help them promote their careers, how it's going to, you know, they'll get to the next salary level and all these sort of things that you know, may not matter to the global research population, but really matters to whether you stay in the job doing the best thing you can do. And what we need to do is then connect that to that better work, the way that you're being recognized and promoted and supported leads to the better research, which we care about as a nation, and all the fairness and equity and everything that comes out of that. So those things are strongly tied together in my mind. And one of the ways, like, to get ugly about it, that we're trying to do is related to Neil's question about trying to find a return on investment, or trying to put a number on what's the impact of having an RSE. So I think that is, it feels a bit brutal, to be honest with you, because I think it's a really nuanced question, and we're going to come up with, oh, it's £7 for every pound you invest, you know. But we need something like that that can tie those two ends of the spectrum together.
Yeah, thanks. Is there more comment? No. Okay, fine. So I have to also take on that. We have 5 minutes left. Very good. We have one more question. I repeat it. RSEs are often on short-term projects. I know of a project that had 5 RSEs come and go. How can we make sure RSE projects have more continuity? I read this as a suggestion for another research question. Is this correct? I don't know who raised this. Or is it a question to us? Maybe both already. Yeah, Michelle.
I would like to answer that in terms of meta-research that's already happening. And I think that's important to emphasize in this discussion, that research on RSE already happens and continues to happen. So my organization did a very small piece of research looking at some of the funding available to support research software, and wrote a blog a couple of years ago, which not surprisingly demonstrated that most research is to fund new pieces of software and innovation rather than to provide maintenance or operational support. And it showed that there was only a small proportion of funding available from national philanthropic industry funders for that kind of continuity. So yeah, it would be useful to have even more research on that, but I wanted to emphasize that, yeah, some things already exist that can help you perhaps in your own internal arguments on some of these issues.
Neil?
Yeah, I was also going to, I think that's a really good point to make. I was also going to turn it around and look at the other thing, which is in many different areas and walks of life, you do have rapid turnover of individual staff on teams. And so the other area of research you can look at is what makes for effective knowledge transfer and knowledge embedding within a project or a team rather than within individuals. And if we can understand whether there are differences for research software versus for any other type of project team, then I think we'll be better at mitigating the effects of this rapid turnover. And then all of the work that people like Michelle and Simon are doing to try and stop doing that will still be relevant, even if you have people who are on longer durations on the project. So I think we also need to look at what works for knowledge transfer.
Yeah. Inga?
So it's, I think, also not only people that have a rapid turnover rate in RSE projects, but it's often also the research software itself that is being developed and not being reused. And to circumvent that, we need some kind of PI for research software or some better global database where you can look up research software. I think there are some national solutions, but here we need some more international connectivity, I think.
Yeah. I would add that this question is really also somehow specific to research software, because in this context we often have these time limit and short-term contracts and changing people in the teams and so on. It also happens in industry, but yeah. I think we will take a look at the last question for this session. Thanks, Martin. And so the question is on the scope of RSE research, or if suggested RSE meta-research, is specifically focused on researching on the craft of making research software, or it's wider than this. I think to answer this question, it would be, we would need to know what means wider, what except the art of making research software. Yeah, and maybe comment from the panel here on this. Yeah, Simon?
So I would say it is wider than the craft of making research software, and I think it should be much wider, in fact. I think it should be a way of pooling together the questions that are coming from the community that are limiting us in some way, shape, or form. And in a perfect world, we'd have some way of identifying which ones were the most important and prioritizing them in our research. So yeah, I'm really interested in how we do that prioritization, but if to answer the question specifically, yes, I think it is. It's much wider than just the craft.
And if you remind the questions that were introduced by the panel, there were many questions that go beyond the craft of making software. So funding was some topic for the research questions, and forming RSE groups, etc. This is not just the making of the software, etc., but the organization of the team, organization of projects, etc., etc. No? So indeed, it goes further, and we are now exactly at 12 o'clock. So I'm a fan of being in time. I'm a German now, so we call it pünktlich. Thanks to the panelists, and thanks to all the audience, also those are online, for interacting with the questions. And we did manage to answer all questions that are at least moderated and forwarded to us. Thanks for this.